So once again, we are recording. So welcome everyone. My name is Marcy Brandenburg and I am the bioinformationist with the Taubman Health Sciences Library.
And hello everyone, I'm Tyler Nix. I'm an informationist also with the Taubman Health Sciences Library.
Great. And so today we are going to talk to you about using Excel to create a few different types of visualizations. So a couple of housekeeping things. Today's charts that we will be talking about do require using Excel 2016 or later. We will be sharing the workshop recording and materials. I believe Tyler will be putting a link to that in the chat session, and we can also share those after the session is completed too. We do have a step-by-step handout that walks through what we will be showing you today, so you don't have to try to make notes for every little step that we're doing today. We are providing that to you. Please feel free to ask questions at any time. You can do so using the chat box. We will be monitoring the chat box. Whichever one of us between Tyler and I who's not talking will definitely be monitoring it, and we'll also be trying to keep an eye on while presenting too. So we can answer questions at various times, and we'll also be stopping periodically to see if any questions had come in and answer those. Participants' microphones were muted upon entry. If for any reason that did not happen or you actually unmuted yourself, please do make sure to mute the session. Again, you can ask questions via the chat box and we will answer what we can. All right, so that's just a little bit of housekeeping. And again, we are recording this session. So many people have used Excel most likely to create various types of visualizations, such as bar graphs and line graphs and pie charts. You may be familiar with using Excel for those types of visualizations, but Excel can actually be used for many other types of visualizations too. So the screenshot on this slide is actually directly from Excel, and that gives you a good idea of Excel's visualization categories of what you can create in Excel. So what we're going to focus on today is the heat map, the box and whisker plot, the tree map, and the radar chart. For each of these visualization types, we will be showing you a few ways to customize them. And a lot of those customizations actually work for different, multiple types of visualizations too, but we'll focus on showing them for a specific type of visualization. And if we have time at the end, which hopefully we will also talk a little bit about how to export visualizations. Again, in the materials that we're sharing, we do have a step-by-step handout that walks through this. So for some reason we don't get through everything today, it is available in that handout for you. All right, so this time I'm going to turn off my camera and start talking to you about some of the visualizations. All right, so the first visualization type that we are going to discuss today is the heat map. So a heat map is used where the individual data values, so the values from your data set, are basically represented by color. So the idea is that color scale is used to help you see patterns in your data. The best options are color combinations for those who are colorblind are to use a blue-orange combination, a blue-red combination, or a blue-brown combination. So at this time, I'm going to switch over to Excel. Just give me one moment to do that. All right, so you should now be seeing an Excel spreadsheet on your screen. So I'm on a heat map tab, and I want to take a moment to talk about the actual data set that we're looking at here. So basically, we have the number of drug overdose deaths for the state of Ohio for several drug categories for each year between 2003 and 2015. So what you can see is that our first column has the drug categories. You can see various categories such as heroin, fentanyl, alcohol, hallucinogens, etc. And then the first row, starting at least in column B, represent our years. So we have 2003 to 2015. And then the rest of the cells are the actual number of deaths. So for example, there were 87 deaths from heroin in 2003. This is an example of a wide data format as opposed to a long data format because we have basically one column for drug categories, a row for the years, and then our data values. If we were to transform this into a long data format, what we would have is we would have a column for drug category, a column for rows, and then a column for the death values. So it would look like heroin in this first, or in row 2 would be heroin 2003, and then the number of deaths. And then the next row would have heroin again, but the following column would be 2004, and then the number of deaths, and then heroin again, 2005, etc. I mentioned this just because getting the data in the right format is sometimes half the battle with visualizations. And certain visualization software tools actually require or work better with better data formats. And so just taking this opportunity to talk a little bit about the data set and the data formatting before we jump into the visualization. But the next thing we're gonna do is actually jump into the visualization. So I want to visualize this data, this number of deaths, using a heat map. So a heat map is a bit different than many other visualization types, and certainly the other ones we're going to talk about today, because we're not actually creating a brand new visualization. A heat map is actually a visualization on top of the data itself. So really, we're just formatting the cells and formatting the existing data. So the first thing I'm going to do is select the cells that I want to format. So I'm going to click on my first cell, which is B2, and while holding down the left click, I'm going to just drag over to N2 and then down to N9, thereby selecting all the sort of data in my data set. So you should be seeing those cells as shaded. So now I'm going to go up to my menu bar in Excel, and I'm on the Home tab or the Home menu, and that's actually where I want to be for this visualization. So in the Home menu, I'm going to go a little over halfway over to this conditional formatting option. And that's where I want to be. So I'm going to go ahead and click on conditional formatting. And I'm ultimately going to go down to New Rule. But before I get down to New Rule, I'm going to pause at color scales and show you that Excel basically has some predefined sort of color combinations or heat map options. And you can scroll over those to see how that would look in your data. But I'm going to continue actually past color scales in my menu here and go down to New Rule to show you how you could specify and create sort of your own specific heat map and rules. So when I go to New Rule, it brings up this new formatting rule window that you should hopefully be seeing on your screen. And the first portion of that, the top section, says select a rule type. And I'm going to go ahead and keep that first option selected, which is format all cells based on their values. For heat map, you're really formatting and coloring everything. You're not just picking out specific things. Like I don't want to color just duplicate values. That would not be a heat map. So I want to format all cells based on their values. And then I'm going to go down to the second half of this window, which is the edit the rule description. And under format style, I'm going to stick with the 2-color scale. But basically, if you're doing a heat map, you're going to want to do 2-color scale or 3-color scale. The data bar and the icon sets, again, not really a heat map. The data bar option would put little bars in each cell, and the icon sets would, you choose from a selection of icons, and it would put specific icons in each cell. I'm going to go ahead and stick with the 2-color scale for today. So what's left is for me to choose my minimum, and I do have options here. I'm going to go from the lowest value because, again, what I really want to do is to show the patterns and the color scale going from my lowest value in my data set to my highest value. So I'm going to choose lowest value for minimum, highest value for maximum. All that's left now is for me to choose the color combination that I want to use. So under minimum, I'm going to go to color, and I'm going to click that drop down arrow, and I can choose from a number of colors. I'm going to go ahead and choose one of these blue colors. And then over at maximum, I'm going to go to the color option. Again, click the drop down bar next to the color, and I'm going to choose a red color under standard colors. So you can see it previews what the full range of colors are going to look like. And now I'm going to click OK. And when I do that, I'll click off my selection. You can see we now have a heat map. It's colored all of the cells that have a data value in them. So this is great, and I have a heat map here. Now sometimes when people create a heat map, they want to remove the actual data values from the cells. So, I don't want the data values maybe to detract. I really just want to look at the patterns. By the way, right now we can very easily and quickly see some patterns, right? We can see, because the low values are blue and the high values are red, we can see very quickly that the highest number of deaths are with, not surprisingly, heroin and fentanyl. And like for heroin, particularly, there's an increase starting in 2012, 2013. We can also see easily that some of these drug categories, such as hallucinogens and barbiturates, the number of deaths in those drug categories are actually quite low compared to some of the other categories in this data set. So let's say I want to create my heat map just like it is, but I want to remove the data values. Maybe I don't care about the actual values themselves, right? I just want to represent the patterns and don't want the data values themselves to distract from the viewer's interpretation. So I'm going to show you a trick to tell Excel to remove the data values, but not remove the formatting that we put in those cells. So I'm going to start by reselecting everything that I just formatted. So I'm going to go ahead and select all of those cells. And then I'm going to right click just anywhere in the selected area. So I right click, and that brings up a menu of options. And in my menu of options, I'm going to go down to Format Cells. And when I click on Format Cells, it pulls up the Format Cells window. And the Format Cells window has a series of tabs. I'm on the Number tab right now, and I'm going to go ahead and stay on the Number tab. That's where I want to be. And under Category, I'm going to choose the last option, which is Custom. And when I click on Custom, I get some new information sort of on the right side here, right? It says Type, and that says General, and this first General is actually a text box. Below that, you'll see General again, and that General is highlighted, and that's really part of the scroll bar of options. So I want to actually go into the text box, so where the first General is, and I'm going to delete General, and instead I'm going to enter 2 semicolons. So semicolon, semicolon, that's what I'm entering. And then I click OK, and when I do that, what you'll see is that Excel removed the actual data values in the cells, but it maintained and kept the actual formatting. So we have a heat map now with our colors to see our patterns, but not the actual data values. So that's what I'm going to talk about the heat map. I see that there is a question that came in asking whether or not you can highlight or remove highlight from the average value. Can you highlight or remove highlight from the average value? I'm not exactly sure what the question's asking. I think you might be asking in the conditional formatting, if I go to my rules, there are options here. So we could do, instead of lowest value, we could do number, percent, formula, or percentile. There isn't actually like an average. I'm not sure if you're trying to figure out like whether or not you would have one color below the average or one color above the average. I don't know, Jacqueline, if maybe you can clarify that question a little bit more. And also if anyone else has questions right now about the heat map, I'm happy to take those before we move on to the next visualization type. There are options under the select a rule type for like formatting only cells that contain, or format only values that are above or below average. I guess maybe that's what you're asking about. I'm not sure if you were asking me to demo that or what, but there is that option. So you could designate that as how you would be formatting your cells. And then what you can see here is when you select that, the rule description options change. So you could specify what you're coloring. You'd only be coloring a specific portion though. So then basically I'm coloring only the cells above that number, and the rest of it would work the same. It's just all of your cells would not necessarily be colored. So hopefully that helps answer that question. Are there any questions at this time about the heat map before we move on to the next visualization type today? I'll just give it a moment in case anyone has anything else they want to type in the chat box. Okay, so I'm not seeing any other questions come in. Again, you can ask questions at any time and we will address them when we pause or when you ask them, depending on the timing. And we are monitoring that chat window. So at this time, I'm going to go back to my slides real quickly. And I'm going to talk about the next visualization type today, which is the box and whisker plot. So the box and whisker plot is a way of visually representing the distribution of a data set. There are various statistical elements that are included right in the box and whisker plot itself. Sorry, I just got distracted by the chat box for a second there. So there are various statistical values and entities that are actually included in the visualization of a box and whisker plot. For example, the median is represented there, the upper and lower quartile, sometimes the mean. The box and whisker plot is one of the visualization types that was first available in Excel 2016. So if you're using an older version of Excel, this will not be sort of an out-of-the-box option. If you're using a different version of Excel too, please note that some of the things that we do, you may have a different interface, and so it might not follow along exactly the same way. So to make sure that we all know how to interpret a box and whisker plot, I'm going to take a moment to walk through the example that's on the slide here. So outliers are generally represented as dots sort of above or below the actual box and whisker plot. And then the data values are included in the box and whisker plot often exclude those outliers when calculating things like your minimum or your median or your mean. So the lower whisker represents the median, the minimum. Again, that's excluding the outlier. Then you have your box, your rectangular box, basically. And the lower line of that represents your lower quartile or first quartile. Those are used synonymously. The line within the box represents the median. And the line at the top of the box is your upper quartile or third quartile. And then the top whisker is your maximum. And the way you interpret this is between the minimum, so like that lower whisker, and the lower line of the box, that represents 25% of your data. And then between the lower edge of the box and the median, that represents another 25% of your data. And so you keep going up. So the median to the upper quartile is another 25%, and then the upper quartile to the maximum or the top whisker, that's another 25% of your data. So that's how you interpret a box and whisker plot and really understand this distribution. So at this time, I'm going to go back to Excel so we can actually look at how to create one of these in Excel. All right, so in Excel, so I'm going to go ahead and click on the next tab, which is the box and whisker tab. So I'm going to take a moment, just like I did with the previous visualization, to actually talk about the data set so you know what we're looking at. So basically we have the number of flu cases for two different flu strains, H1N1 and H3. We have this information for several different flu seasons, so 2015 to 16 season, 16 to 17, 17 to 18, and 18 to 19. And then for each season, we actually have it broken into several age groups. So 0 to 4 years, 5 to 24 years, 25 to 64, and over 65. So basically the first column is our seasons, the second column is the breakdown of the age groups, the third column is our H1N1 data, and then the fourth column is the H3 data. This is more an example of that long data format because you'll see that we have seasons, you know, a full column for seasons, a full column for our age groups, and then the actual data values. If we were to do this in the wide data format like the heat map was in, we would have just one row for each season, and then probably the age group going across the top as the top row, and then the data values would be sort of spread out as a matrix. All right, so I want to create a box and whisker plot using this data. To start with, I'm just going to focus on the H1N1 data. So I'm going to go ahead and include the season information and the age group information in my box and whisker plot. So I'm going to go ahead and select my first three columns of data, basically, the season, the age group, and the H1N1 data. And then I'm going to go up to my menu bar in Excel and I'm going to click on the Insert tab. And about halfway over in the Insert tab is this chart section. This is where we're going to be focusing the rest of today. And about middle of this chart section is this icon that has 4 blue bars. This is Excel's icon to represent statistical charts. And if I click the drop-down arrow next to that, you'll see I get 2 options, histogram and box and whisker. And I'm going to go down and choose box and whisker. So what you'll see is I now have a box and whisker plot or chart. And so let's talk about a few things. We have 4 different box and whisker plots. Each of those represents one of the age groups. So the season information actually is not really represented here, but the numbers, the distribution of the data, those numbers of flu cases actually go across all of those seasons. So on the y-axis here, we have our flu cases. But of course, if you didn't know anything about the raw data, you wouldn't know what we have on the y-axis. So the first thing that I'm going to do is actually label the y-axis. And one thing about Excel is sometimes there are multiple ways to do the same thing in Excel. So we might be showing you one way to do it. There may be other ways. We may even show you multiple ways to do the same thing today. So the first thing I'm going to do is make sure that my border of the chart is selected. If it wasn't selected, so I'm going to unselect it actually. To select that is just to click in some white space within the chart. So you'll see that there's the selected border of my whole chart or visualization. And when that is selected, at the top, you'll notice we have this new chart tools section, and it has two tabs, design and format. And I'm currently on the design tab. So I'm going to stay on the design tab. I'm going to go to the very leftmost option, which is add chart element, and click the little drop down arrow next to that. And in that menu is this access titles. So I'm going to go to access titles and then choose primary vertical. And when I do that, you'll see we now have a little label for my y-axis, which is access title. And this is just a text box. So I'm just going to click in that. Oops, sorry, get rid of that. I'm going to click in that once. And that allows me to basically edit like a text box. I can delete access title and enter in what I want for my y-axis, which is going to be flu cases. So that's one thing. We can do the same thing and chosen the horizontal axis option, but in the interest of time, I'm just going to label the y-axis right now. All right, so moving on to the next thing that I want to talk about with the box and whisker plot. Let's talk about some ways that we can actually format the box and whisker, the boxes themselves. So I'm going to right click on any one of these boxes. If you either left click or right click on one box, it will select all of them actually. So I'm just right clicking on one of them and you'll probably notice that they're sort of selected, all of them. I also get this drop down menu of options. So I'm going to go ahead and choose the last option, which is format data series. And when I do that, the section on the right side of my spreadsheet shows up and it's called format data series. A lot of things that you'll be able to do, a lot of customization in your visualizations will appear on the right-hand side. This might change topics, so it might not be format data series, it might be something else, but this is where a lot of things do appear. So in the format data series section here, you'll see I've got three icons, a paint can, a pentagon, and then these three green bars. And right now I'm on the three green bars, and that's where I can get to my series options. So there's one thing that I neglected to mention, which is one thing that is different about the box and whisker plot right now that I'm showing you in Excel, and the one that I showed you in my slides. And that was that mean marker, which is these little X's. So in my format data series, you'll see that there's this option says show mean markers, and it's currently checked. I could uncheck that, and that would get rid of those X's. If I check it again, those X's appear. Those represent the mean. So we have not only the median, which is the line, but the mean, which is the X. And in Excel, it defaults to including the mean marker here, but you could remove that if you wanted to. In addition, under this section, this area is this gap width. So this represents the amount of white space basically between two box and whisker plots. So it's currently set at 100%. I'm going to decrease that to 75%, and I can do that by dragging the slider. I can also use the up and down arrows, or if I knew the exact number, I could even enter it into the box. So what you might have noticed when I changed that to 75% is the boxes themselves got a little bit wider, decreasing the white space between the boxes. So that is one thing that you can do depending on the width that you want of your boxes, and that's one way to change that. All right, let's talk about some other things we can do here. So another thing we can do, I'm going to stay on this format data series section, but I'm going to go to the paint can instead of the three green bars. So I'm clicking on the paint can, and I get two options, fill and border, and I'm going to focus on fill right now. So I'm going to click the arrow next to fill, and then I'm going to click the radio button next to solid fill. And when I do that, you can see I have my color option. So this is where I could change the color if I wanted to use a different color for my boxes. And below color is transparency, and it's currently set to 0, but I'm going to increase that to 25%. And again, I can do that by dragging the slider. I can use my up and down arrows. What you'll notice when I change transparency to 25% is that the actual color in my boxes gets a little bit lighter. So I'm actually going to close out a format data series right now just so you can see this and unselect everything. So the color within the boxes got a little bit lighter. thereby increasing the transparency. And so this is something I would recommend if you're going to use the mean markers. I think it's a little bit easier to see those X's when we have a little bit of increased transparency. So that's one thing you may want to keep in mind. All right, let's talk about some other things we can do here. So let's look at our y-axis scale. So we start at 0. That's great. We want to start at 0 whenever possible when creating a visualization. And we go up to 10,000, and that's fine. But if we look at our actual data values in our box and whisker plot, the highest one doesn't even hit 9,000. So maybe we want to adjust our scale. So I'm going to show you how one can adjust your scale. So I'm going to start by right-clicking on the actual y-axis. So I right-click and I get, again, a bunch of options here. I'm going to go to Format Axis. And that pops up this section on the right-hand side again, but now we're on the Format Axis information. And I'm on the 3 green bars, which gives me my axis options. And it goes from a minimum of 0 and currently shows a maximum of 10,000. This is just a text box, so I'm just going to change the 10,000 to 9,000. Hit my enter key and you'll see that it changed my axis in my visualization and sort of redrew or altered the visualization to match the new axis values. The last thing I'm going to do for this very specific box and whisker plot is change my chart title, because right now it just says chart title and that's not very informative. So all I need to do is click in it. It's a text box. I can delete chart title. And I'm going to enter the title that I want, which is going to be 2015 to 2019 H1N1 flu cases by age group. Might be a little lengthy title, but it's informative. It tells me what years are included, which strain that we're looking at flu, and how this is divided. So that's what I'm going to show you right now about this box and whisker plot. But before I pause to take questions, I'm going to do one more thing. So right now we have focused on the H1N1 data. But if you remember from our raw data set, we also have flu cases for H3 data. So let's say I want to create a box and whisker plot for the H3 data. We could do that by going through the exact same steps that I just went through with the H1N1 data. But we have another option. I'm going to show you a little trick that is going to bring some of the formatting over with the new data. It's also going to lose some formatting, so it's not perfect. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by clicking or selecting my current visualization. So again, I want the outer border selected. And basically, I'm just going to copy and paste this. So I'm going to go up to my home menu. I'm going to go to copy and click on copy. And then I'm going to select basically an empty cell. This is where I'm going to paste my new box and whisker plot. And I'm going to go up again to the home menu. I'm going to click paste. And now you should see we have 2 identical box and whisker plots. That's fine. That's what I want for right now. I'm going to make sure that the new one is selected. And then we're going to go back to my raw data and let's look at the raw data. So Excel will actually show you what data is being used in the selected visualization. So you can see there's this purple border around season and age group, and a blue border around the H1N1 data, and a little red border around the heading of the H1N1 data. So for my new visualization where I want to use the H3 data, the season and the age group data can remain the same, right? So that's fine. Really, I just want the border, the selection of column C to be moved over to column D. And I can do that very easily just by clicking on the border, the selection border of column C, right where it's border basically between column C and D. I'm just going to click on it and drag it over. So all I did was click and drag one column. And when I did that, you will see that my box and whisker plot that was selected redrew itself to match or to using the new data. So some of the formatting didn't come through. The transparency sort of disappeared. For some reason, when using this data, it defaults to using these inner points to have them included. Those are those circles in there. I'm not sure why it did that, to be honest. But some stuff did come over. So we still have the same y-axis. We still have the same chart title, right? In fact, the first thing I'm going to do is click on that chart title and update it to represent H3, but I didn't have to type the rest of the information in there. The scale came through. In fact, that's a problem here because for 65 and older, the data values are much higher. And so that's now running off my chart. So if I knew at the beginning that I was going to create box and whisker plots for both of these. And if I want to compare them, I want to use the same scale. So what I should have done is looked across both data sets when I did my first box and whisker plot, determine what the highest value would be. And let's say I would want 1200. And then when I changed the axis value of my first box and whisker plot, I could have made that 0 to 1200. And then the scale would have already been set up in the new version when I did it with the H3 data. So it's not perfect. This is a trick that can be used with other visualization types too. It's not unique to box and whisker plot. But depending on what you're doing and how much formatting you're doing, this can be a nice trick that can save a little bit of time. One other thing that I forgot to mention when we were looking at the data early on was that when we look at the age group, like 0 to 4 years, 5 to 24 years, these are represented multiple times in our data set. And so it's really important to be consistent about how those are represented. So we don't want like 0 to 4 space YR, and then the next time it shows up, have it be like 0-4, no space YR. And then one other time 0 to 4, and we spell out year. We don't want that. As long as you're consistent with how it's inputted, Excel is pretty good about recognizing that pattern and bringing that into the visualization. So with that, I'm gonna pause to see if there are any questions. I'm gonna look, I see a couple things have come through the chat, so I'm just gonna take a look to see if there's anything for me to answer. So someone asked, would you be able to put the columns from 2 data sets side by side in the same chart? I'm not sure with the box and whisker plot that it allows that option. I haven't actually tried that, so I'll just really quickly see what happens when I select maybe all the data and create a box and whisker plot. Let's see what happens then. So yeah, okay, so it does work. Yep, so you can do that in Excel. It will recognize that. So that can be done very quickly. You simply select the full data set that you want. So that is absolutely another way of obviously doing a side-by-side comparison, and potentially an even better one. But it sort of depends on what you're using, what the point of the data sets are, how you want to represent it. And then you could do some of the same formatting, of course. And it automatically brought in using 2 different colors to represent this. Now, of course, you're going to want to use a legend representing which different colors are, or what the different colors represent in your data set. Are there any other questions about the box and whisker plot before I turn things over to Tyler to start talking about a heat map? Okay, well, I will stop my screen share so that Tyler can share his. And in the meantime, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to put it into the chat box, and we can go from there.
Okay, great. Thanks, Marcy. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you.
Great. Okay, and I'm sharing my video again real quick just to say hi to those of you who maybe joined a little bit later. So we're halfway through right now. We have, Marcy just covered the heat map and the box and whisker plot. In the next half of the session, I'm gonna cover a tree map and a radar chart. And then I'll also have a few tips at the end for ways you can export these, like if you're gonna use one in a publication or something like that, how to get the best export. And also there are links to the documents in the chat, and we will be sending out the video after the fact. So if you did join us a little later, don't worry, you'll have everything. Okay, so we're gonna move on now. The next chart we're looking at is the tree map. And a tree map, these are usually used to visualize parts of a whole. Traditionally, they were created to do hierarchical structures, but now it seems like you just see them more often as parts of a whole, whether it's hierarchical or not. But the way to kind of interpret these is to read them left to right and top to bottom. And so in the example that we have on the slide here, we're looking at Singapore, exports from Singapore in 2012. And there's a little banner that's a little bit hard to see, but at the top of all this data, there's a little banner that says $226 billion USD. And I point that out because I'm going to show you how to make a banner when we make our tree map, because that's not something that Excel does by default. And basically all of these different export types are adding up to this sum of 226 billion USB. So this one, we see that petroleum oils refined is a large category here, 28%, but there are lots of others here that we can't necessarily make out. So this isn't necessarily the best example, but just sort of a typical example of what you might see. So I'm going to switch to Excel. Okay, and now we're looking at our tree map data in Excel. So we're in the third box over in the third worksheet in the Excel workbook. And similar to data that Marcy pointed out for the box and whisker plot, we're now looking at long data. And this is also set up where we have these three, so we have three payer categories. We have the private and government payer category, and we're looking at healthcare expenditures for the state of California in 2009. And so for these healthcare expenditures, we're seeing private and government paid expenditures, Medicare and Medicaid. So we have three different payers. And then within each payer category, we have these 9 healthcare services and products. So again, you want these to match exactly so that Excel can make sense of these and know that they're grouped together. So I would just recommend typing it in once and then using the drop down or the drag and drop feature in Excel to duplicate what you have so that it matches exactly. So to start creating our tree map, you would highlight all of your data, and then similar to the tab that Marcy showed you on the box and whisker, I'm going to click on the Insert tab and come to the recommended charts. And there's one here called Hierarchy Chart, and it looks like a tree map. So I'm going to click the arrow and select Tree Map. And now we have a starting point for a tree map. So you can see that Excel has recognized these different data categories. So the private and government data is all together in its 9 different healthcare services and products. Medicare data is grouped together and Medicaid data is grouped together. The first thing I would do if I were making this chart, I would prefer to just read it left to right all the way across, and use the default here is for Medicare and Medicaid data to be stacked. So I think I'm just going to drag the right side out to give a little more space for the labels and just to be able to easily read things left to right. The next thing that I would want to do is, if you remember in the slide, there was a little banner across the top. And I would rather use a banner as a legend than having a separate legend. And there are a couple of reasons for that. One reason is that if we get rid of this separate legend right here at the top of the data categories, that'll open up a little bit more space so that we can read our labels a little bit better. So I'm going to just click on the legend to select it, then right click and click delete. And so that has deleted our legend. It's opened up the chart a little bit. But now the problem is, since we don't have a banner in place to point out our different data categories, the payer categories are actually overlapped on the healthcare service and product boxes for the biggest box for each payer. So in other words, the biggest box within the healthcare within the private and government data is relabeled private and government at the top and physician and clinical care at the bottom. Similar with the Medicare and Medicaid data, one of the boxes is double labeled to get us these category terms or the category labels. And so instead of doing that, I'm going to click one time on the interior data set here. So now you see the data series within the chart is highlighted all together. And I'm going to right click, Format Data Series. And the first option that we have in the Format Data Series under the histogram or the 3 bars option here is these label options. And the default label option is overlapping. That's what we're looking at here. And I'm going to switch that to banner. And I'm going to close the data series box. And now what you see is each one of the payer categories got its own banner at the top. So I like this because we've now got the labels for each payer category separated out. But the problem with this now is that all of the banners that came in default to gray. And I want the banners to match their data category color. So to do that, I'm going to click one more time within the data series, and I'm going to click specifically on the private and government data. And you'll see now the other two are grayed out, and we're just going to be editing this data series, private and government data. So I'm going to right click on the banner for private and government. I'm going to go to the fill color option, and I'm just going to choose the default blue color that matches our data series. So now our private government data the banner matches the data color. And to do the same for Medicare, I would simply then just click in Medicare, right click, and choose the orange fill color. So now we have a matching banner for each of our different payer series. And as long as we're in Excel, or if we copied this over to PowerPoint, we can use the sort of hover feature with our mouse to be able to read these healthcare service and product labels. If you were going to use this as a still image in a publication or something like that, you may want to do a little bit of work to try and shorten your product category name so that you can read those a little bit more. Or you could always use a descriptive blurb or add another legend to be able to sort of use some kind of shorthand here to be able to get a better look at what all the different healthcare services and products are. One other thing that I would want to point out, I'm gonna rename this chart very quickly, and then I'm going to show you one other way that you can customize these banners to get a little bit more data into the chart itself. So if I were naming this chart, bear with me while I type this out. Healthcare spending in California, 2009. And the total for this spending is 231 billion USD. We don't have this in the table itself, but I just want to add that to indicate the total. So if you wanted to use your banners to also show subtotals for private and government payer spending, Medicare and Medicaid spending subtotals out of this 230, one thing you could do is you could jump back into your data and you could say for the private and government data, the subtotal of this is 140.5 billion USD. And you could just use the drag and drop to then make that uniform for your private and government data. And now we see that it's populated that subtotal to this banner. So you could add the subtotals and just update your whole data range for each of the payers, and then you would have your subtotals within the banner itself. I see we do have a question. Can we change the color scheme of healthcare service and product column? Since we have the same service and product for all payers. Yes, I think you could do that. The only problem then, so yes, you could do that. I think if I'm interpreting your question correctly, you could set the colors on the healthcare services and products but then it would make it a little bit harder to tell, potentially to tell the difference between like the physician and clinical care service between, if it's the payer, if it's the private and government payer, the Medicare payer, or the Medicaid payer. But yes, you could do that. I'm not going to be able to demo that right now in the interest of time, but you could do that, and then you would have those colors reflected across each of these boxes. They would still be arranged spatially left to right for the different payers, but then the boxes would share colors across the chart. So if you want, we can connect after the webinar, and I believe that's possible. We could look into that a little bit more off list. Okay, any other questions about the tree map? And if not, we will move on and look at the radar chart. We've got about 20 minutes left, so we're doing fine on time. Okay, so I'm going to go back into my slides. And the last chart we're going to look at is the radar chart. You may have also heard these referred to as a spider chart or a star plot, but these are pretty often used for displaying performance data. So a lot of times you'll see this, like the example that we have here in the slides is an allocated budget and an actual spending amount for a fictional business. But you see these a lot of times with this sort of like proposed versus actual costs or business data. But it can be a good way to compare multivariate data. They can be handy. These are solid colors. They can get a little bit busy. I'm seeing that my internet connection, I just had a notification that it was unstable, so I hope I'm not breaking up too much.
I think you broke up briefly, Tyler.
Okay. Okay, so really the point that I was just making there for a minute was that these tend to work better when they're more simple. So I wouldn't recommend creating one with more than maybe 3 or 4 polygons at the max, or a different data series, because the more lines you have happening in the radar chart, they can get really sort of busy and difficult to interpret, especially if you're using a shaded polygon, because the biggest polygon is gonna, if it's shaded, it's gonna cover the data from the others. So I would just keep these simple. So I'm gonna jump back into Excel. And moving now over to the fourth worksheet in our workbook, this radar chart data. So again, this is pretty simple data that we're working with. This is sample, it's just sort of a sample healthcare provider survey for 3 fictional towns. So we have town A, B, and C. And just imagine basically there was a survey of healthcare providers. And so, well, a survey for patients about their healthcare providers. So we have MD knowledge and attitude, and then the simplicity, access, wait time, cost, and availability of visiting the physician. And so the way that we would start our radar chart would be, again, to highlight all of the data, go to the Insert tab, and to the chart section here that we've been using so far. And you'll see here there's a little icon for a radar chart or a surface chart. I'm going to click the drop down, and I'm going to use this version of a radar chart. There are options where you have data points highlighted along the lines with filled in polygons, but we're going to look at this one for now. Okay, so here's our radar chart. In terms of interpreting these, basically what we're looking at, there's one radial axis that that you interpret for each of the data series from the center of the chart out. So the first line is a 0 on the scale. The second is a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, where 5 is the highest rating and 0 is the lowest rating. And so for each of these, basically, you're looking for the line that is the furthest out around the radar chart, because that means it's that town is going to be scoring the highest for each of these different data categories. So in other words, town B has, if you were going to go to a doctor in a town in your region, you would probably look at town B because the scores being closer to higher indicates that the satisfaction was higher on those surveys. So if I were using this chart just because of personal preference, I think I would want to move the legend from the top of the radar chart to below, down at the bottom of the radar chart. So I'm going to click on that one time. Sorry, I'm click on it once, right click and format the legend. And the first option here is the legend position. So I'm going to click bottom. Okay, simple enough. You could, at this point, you could change any of the colors of any of the lines. Another thing I would do, like we've been doing so far, is just rename the chart. So I would call this something like regional healthcare satisfaction. And that is your radar chart. So it's very simple and quick. Again, I would recommend keeping these, not too cluttered, but it's really quick and easy to make. So any questions about the radar chart or any of the charts at this point? We've got about 6 minutes left. I can mention a couple of pointers for exporting these. And I'm not seeing any questions come into the chat. So quickly, in terms of exporting these to get the best image quality, if you want to use, if you're interested in using one of these in a poster or a publication, for 3 out of the 4, so for the box and whisker plot, the tree map, and the radar chart, what I would recommend is right-clicking and copying the whole chart. And then you can launch, I'm not going to do this for the moment just because screen sharing would get a little bit difficult, but basically you launch PowerPoint and you would just paste, after you'd copied your image, you can paste it into PowerPoint. And what that's going to allow you to do is that in PowerPoint, once it's there, you can right-click and choose the option to save as picture. And that's going to give you the option to save it then as a PNG file or a JPEG, a TIFF, I think I already said PNG, bitmap. But basically, you can save it in more file types than you would be able to through Excel. And then you could pull that PNG or TIFF into something like Photoshop or whatever you might want to use or even Microsoft Paint. To make any changes that you might need to make in terms of meeting your publisher's requirements for pixel count and things like that. So that's what I would recommend for the box and whisker, the tree map, and the radar chart. For the heat map, you're not going to be able to copy and paste it out of Excel because that is really just formatting the cells and not really creating a new image. So for heat map, really your best bet is going to be just to do a screenshot or a screen grab. We do have a question. Is this just personal preference or any rules which chart should be chosen for which kind of data set? That is a great question. In general, there are some guidelines for which charts represent data, particular kinds of data in the best way. What we should probably do, what we can do is follow up with you and send some resources after the fact. If you Google what kind of data you have, or what kind of data, what you're trying to express, you can often find some things that way, but there are some good resources out there. In general, if you're wanting to express data over time, then something like a line graph would be recommended because you're going to be seeing it left to right over time. There are lots of rules. Maybe Marcy, if you have any thoughts, you could jump in. It's kind of a big topic to get into too many details right at the end of the session, but I think we could send you some resources after the fact.
Yeah, I agree with everything that Tyler just said. The only thing I would add is basically, yes, it really depends on what type of data you have and what it is that you're trying to show with that data. So for example, the heat map is good if you're looking for patterns in the data, and that's really what you're looking for or what you're trying to show. The box and whisker plot is good if you're looking at the distribution of data. So like certain types of visualizations are really only gonna work depending on what the question is that you're trying to answer. And so when creating a visualization, that's one of the first things you need to figure out is what is it that you're trying to show? What is the question you're trying to answer? Because that can help inform which visualization type you would use. Are there any other questions that anyone has? Of course, everyone should feel free to reach out to Tyler and I, or at the beginning of the slides, we had a sort of a shared email address. You're welcome to email any of those at any point in time. We're always happy to help offline. We do have a couple more minutes, so if anyone has any questions, please feel free to put them into the chat box. We appreciate everyone's joining us today. Thank you, Tyler. Tyler put up on the screen that front slide that has both of our individual email addresses and also that group email address, the libvisualization@umich.edu. Please feel free to email any of those. If you do the group one, both Tyler and I are on that, along with some of our other colleagues in the library that do visualization services. And so we will triage that request appropriately to the person with the best expertise and knowledge. So I'm seeing just a lot of thank you messages come in. Again, thank you all for taking the time today. So I'm not seeing any other questions. So I'm thinking at this point in time, I will turn off the recording and just say thank you again to everyone for joining us.
Yep. Thanks all.